The wind in the Dakota Territory had teeth, and in the winter of 1888, it bit with a particular vengeance. For 10-year-old Ilara, huddled in the corner of the bleak Greywood orphanage dormitory, the cold was a constant companion. It seeped through the cracks in the walls and rose from the floorboards, a physical manifestation of the emptiness that had settled in her heart since her parents were taken by fever 2 years prior. Her only defense against it was a thick wool blanket, woven by her mother in a pattern of faded blues and greens, the last tangible piece of a life filled with warmth. It smelled of wood smoke and a faint hint of lavender, the scent of home. Mrs. Gable, the orphanage matron, whose face seemed permanently pinched by disapproval, saw the blanket as a frivolous attachment. "Tears won't mend a torn seam, child," she'd snapped earlier that day, her voice as sharp as the frost on the window panes. "And that rag won't shield you from the realities of this world." Her words echoed in Ilara's ears as she slipped out the back door, seeking a moment's peace from the oppressive silence of the orphanage. She clutched her blanket tight around her thin shoulders, the wind whipping her brown hair across her face. She made her way to the skeletal grove of cottonwood trees by the frozen creek, her usual refuge. It was here, shielded from the prying eyes of the town, that she could pretend she was just a girl on her family's homestead, waiting for her father to return from the fields. But today, the solace was shattered. Propped against the trunk of the largest cottonwood was a man. He was Lakota, his dark hair matted with sweat and dirt, his leather tunic torn at the shoulder, revealing a dark, angry wound. His breathing was a shallow, ragged whisper in the vast quiet. His eyes, deep-set and clouded with pain, found hers. There was no threat in them, only a profound, weary acceptance of his fate. He was dying, alone in the biting cold. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to retreat to the grim safety of Greywood. But she couldn't. She saw not a fearsome warrior, as the townspeople would have, but a man shivering just as she did. A man leaving the world without a shred of comfort. With trembling hands, she unwrapped her mother's blanket from her own shoulders. It was everything she had. Hesitantly, she stepped forward and gently draped it over his shivering form, tucking it carefully around his chest. He managed a slow, deliberate blink, a silent acknowledgement, a thank you. Without another look, Ilara turned and ran back, the cold biting at her now unprotected frame, leaving her only treasure behind. As the first pale light of dawn broke over the frozen plains, a quiet alarm spread through the Lakota winter camp. Chaitan had not returned. His brother, Cale, a man whose presence was as commanding as the winter wind, stood staring at the empty space where Chaitan's horse should have been tethered. A grim understanding settled in his heart. He gathered 3 of his best trackers, their movements swift and silent, their faces etched with the same concern he felt. There were no grand pronouncements, only a shared glance that spoke volumes. They followed the faint trail left in the snow-dusted earth, a path that told the story of a lone rider struggling against the elements. The tracks led them away from the open plains and toward a small, secluded grove of cottonwood trees, a place of quiet solitude. As they neared, Cale held up a hand and his men froze. The air was still, heavy with a finality that chilled him more than the morning frost. There, at the base of the largest tree, they found him. Chaitan was still, his life extinguished by the cold and his wounds. But he was not as they had expected to find him. His body wasn't contorted in a final, agonizing struggle. He looked peaceful, almost as if he were sleeping. Covering his torso and shoulders was a faded, patchwork wool blanket, its simple design foreign to their people. It was an object of the white settlers, yet it was laid over his brother with unmistakable care. Cale knelt, his hand hovering over the fabric. His men watched, their grief momentarily eclipsed by confusion. Who would do this? An enemy would have stripped him bare, leaving him to the indignity of the elements. This was an act of tenderness, a gesture of respect in the face of death. Cale's gaze followed a set of small, frantic footprints leading away from the grove, heading east. They were the tracks of a child. He carefully folded the blanket, its worn wool a stark contrast to the hardened leather of his own attire. He knew then that their mission had changed. They would mourn their brother, but first, they had to find the soul who had granted him a dignified end. The morning air in the Greywood Orphanage dormitory was colder than usual, or perhaps it just felt that way to Ilara. Without the familiar weight of her mother's blanket, the thin, scratchy sheet provided little comfort against the biting draft that seeped through the window frames. She had slept fitfully, haunted by the image of the man in the snow, his quiet suffering echoing in her mind. A profound sadness mingled with a gnawing anxiety in her stomach. What if someone found out? What would Mrs. Gable do? The head mistress was not known for her kindness, and consorting with the Lakota was an offense she couldn't even imagine the punishment for. Breakfast was a grim affair of watery oatmeal and stale bread. Ilara huddled in her seat, trying to make herself small and invisible, pulling her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders. The other children, sensing her distraction, left her alone. Suddenly, a commotion from outside broke the morning's monotonous quiet. A hushed murmur rippled through the dining hall, followed by the sharp, panicked voice of one of the staff members from the main entrance. "They're just standing there." Mrs. Gable stormed from her office, her face a mask of stern fear. "No one is to go near the windows. Get back to your chores, all of you." Her order was useless. Drawn by a morbid curiosity, the children and staff flocked to the windows overlooking the front grounds. Ilara, swept along by the crowd, found a small gap and peered out. Her breath caught in her throat. An ocean of solemn faces stared back. Hundreds of Lakota warriors stood in silent formation, their presence dominating the snow-covered landscape. They weren't yelling or brandishing weapons. They were simply there, a powerful, silent testament. Panic began to bubble in the room, but Ilara's fear was different. It was personal. Her eyes scanned the silent legion until they found the man at the very front. He was tall and carried himself with a quiet authority. As if sensing her gaze, he looked directly toward her window. Slowly he raised his hand, and in it she saw the familiar frayed edges and faded floral pattern of her mother's blanket. Time seemed to stop. He knew they were here for her. The air in the dormitory crackled with a fear so thick Ilara could taste it. A few of the younger children began to cry, their whimpers swallowed by the heavy, ominous silence from outside. The sight of her mother's blanket, held aloft by the stern-faced warrior, sent a tremor through her small body. They knew. They had come for her. Suddenly, Mrs. Gable burst into the room, her face pale and pinched, her eyes wild with a mixture of terror and fury. "To the cellar, all of you now," she shrieked, her voice a piercing command. "Bar the windows. Don't let them see you." She shoved children towards the door, her movements frantic. "Savages at our door," she muttered, more to herself than anyone, the words dripping with years of ingrained mistrust. "They've come for blood, I know it." But as Ilara was herded along with the others, she risked one last glance out the window. The man, Cale, remained perfectly still. He wasn't brandishing a weapon or shouting threats. He simply stood there, his gaze patient and searching, holding the blanket not as a trophy, but as a question. The wind whipped at his dark hair and the edges of the wool, but he was as unmoving as the ancient pines behind him. His calm was a stark contrast to the chaos erupting within the orphanage walls. In that moment, a profound realization washed over Ilara, cutting through her fear. Mrs. Gable was wrong. This wasn't an attack. The man's eyes held no malice. They held a quiet, solemn purpose. He was looking for the owner of the blanket. He was looking for the person who had shown his brother kindness in his last moments. The panic, the screaming, the terror, it was all a terrible misunderstanding. Mrs. Gable was now at the main hall window, screaming insults into the cold air, her voice cracking with hysteria. Ilara knew, with the certainty that only a child can possess, that this would only make things worse. She was the only one who could stop it. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and resolve. Taking a deep breath, she slipped away from the terrified huddle of children, her small feet padding silently against the wooden floorboards, heading directly for the heavy oak door that separated the storm outside from the storm within. Ilara's hand trembled as she reached for the heavy iron latch of the main door. The wood was cold, vibrating faintly with the force of Mrs. Gable's continued shouting from the second-floor window. "Get away from our door, you heathens! Leave this place!" Her voice was a shrill, useless sound against the profound silence of the men outside. Taking a deep breath that did little to calm her hammering heart, Ilara pulled. The door groaned open, spilling a shaft of dim interior light onto the packed snow. The frigid Dakota air hit her face, sharp and clean. She stepped across the threshold, a tiny figure in a threadbare dress, and pulled the door shut behind her, muting Mrs. Gable's tirade. The world outside was hushed, muffled by the fresh layer of white. For a moment, everything stopped. 400 pairs of eyes, dark and unreadable, fixed on her. The sheer presence of the warriors was overwhelming, a silent sea of leather and fur under a grey sky. At their head stood Kale. His face, etched with grief and solemn purpose, showed no surprise. It was as if he had been waiting only for her. He held the blanket steady, his gaze locked on hers. Slowly, reverently, he lowered it. It was no longer an accusation, but a question that had found its answer. Ilara met his gaze, her fear dissolving into a strange sense of shared understanding. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, weary sorrow and something else, respect. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Yes, it was me." Kale returned the nod. He took a step forward, his moccasins making no sound on the snow. From a pouch at his side, he withdrew a small object. He knelt, placing it gently on the top step. Then he carefully folded Ilara's blanket and laid it beside the item. It was a necklace, intricately beaded with blue and white, with a single, polished eagle feather hanging from its center. A gift, an exchange of honor. He looked at her one last time, a silent acknowledgement passing between the formidable warrior and the small child. Then he rose, turned to his men, and raised a hand. Without a word, the entire assembly turned and began to walk away, melting back into the landscape as silently as they had arrived. Ilara stood alone on the steps, the cold forgotten, clutching her mother's blanket, the unexpected weight of the warrior's gratitude resting at her feet. The heavy oak door clicked shut, plunging the entrance hall into a dim, dusty silence. For a moment, Ilara remained frozen, the rough wool of her blanket in one hand, the cool, smooth beads and soft feather of the necklace in the other. The weight of the gift felt immense, a tangible piece of an honor she didn't fully understand. The immediate, thundering silence was broken by the harsh clatter of shoes on the wooden stairs. Mrs. Gable descended, her face a mask of purple rage, her earlier fear replaced by pure, undiluted fury. Her eyes were not on Ilara but on the necklace. "Give that to me," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. She lunged, but Ilara instinctively recoiled, clutching the necklace to her chest. "It's a gift," Ilara whispered, her voice barely audible. The headmistress's lips curled. "A gift from savages? You defied me. You endangered every child in this house for a piece of heathen jewelry." From the shadows of the hallway leading to the cellar, the other children began to emerge. Their faces were a mixture of expressions Ilara had never seen directed at her before. Some stared with wide-eyed awe, others with a lingering fear, and a few, like older Thomas, with a sneer of jealousy. They saw the beautiful object in her hands and the headmistress's anger, and they kept their distance, a silent jury rendering its verdict. "You are an outcast, girl," Mrs. Gable declared, her voice rising so all could hear. The humiliation of being ignored by the Lakota leader had curdled into a desperate need to reassert her authority. "You have shown your true colors. You do not belong with decent folk. From this day forward, you will take your meals alone. You will perform your chores alone. You will not speak to the other children, nor they to you. You are a pariah in this house." She pointed a trembling finger toward the stairs. "Now go to your room." Without another word, Ilara turned and walked up the stairs of the other children following her like physical blows. She didn't feel shame. Clutching the blanket and the necklace, she felt the chill of isolation, but it was now tempered by a strange, quiet warmth, the memory of a silent, respectful exchange that no one else in this cold, grey house could ever comprehend. The days that followed were a cold, silent punishment. Ilara was an island in the crowded orphanage, ostracized by the other children who mimicked Mrs. Gable's scorn. She was assigned the harshest chores, her hands raw from scrubbing floors and washing laundry in icy water. At night, in her desolate corner of the dormitory, she would secretly trace the intricate beadwork of the Lakota necklace. The smooth, cool beads were a tangible reminder that her act of kindness had been seen and honored, a secret warmth against the chill of her isolation. News of the incident at Greywood traveled to the nearby trading town of Oakhaven. It became a distorted tale of savage intimidation and a foolish girl. But one couple, a trader named Silas Peterson and his wife Mary, heard the story differently. Silas often traded with the Lakota and understood their ways. The tale of a warrior kneeling to return a blanket and offer a gift of honor spoke not of a threat, but of a profound debt repaid. Intrigued by the quiet courage this story implied, they rode their wagon to the orphanage a week later. They found Ilara in the yard, trying to mend a broken fence with small, determined hands, while other children played at a distance. Mrs. Gable greeted the respected couple with a saccharine smile, but her eyes shot daggers at Ilara. When the Petersons asked to speak with the girl, the headmistress reluctantly agreed. In the sterile quiet of the office, Mary spoke gently. "We heard about your bravery, child." Ilara, startled by the kindness, simply nodded. Silas added, "An eagle feather is a great honor. May we see it?" Hesitantly, Ilara pulled the necklace from beneath her collar. The Petersons looked at it, then at the girl's clear, unwavering eyes. They saw not a troublemaker, but a child with a deep well of compassion. In that moment, they knew their search was over. The adoption process was swift. Mrs. Gable could not refuse such a respectable family without raising questions. On a crisp autumn morning, Ilara walked out of Greywood Orphanage for the last time. In one hand, she clutched her old, worn blanket. Around her neck, the necklace rested against her chest. She climbed into the Petersons' wagon, and as it pulled away, she didn't look back at the grey building that had been her prison. She looked forward, toward the horizon and the promise of a home where her heart would finally be celebrated.